I got an email from HR in Washington. It's too controversial, it's too difficult, we're letting you go. Giving the definition of the law, and this is what I was losing my job for. That was dark. It was saying you can fire these people, you can discriminate against them, you can harass them with impunity. And then over the course of the next 6 months, my life kind of unraveled. And so there was this question of, does the belief that men are men and women are women and that matters, is that protected as a philosophical belief?
Wow. Did you ever imagine you might be at the centre of this kind of hoo-ha, particularly involving JK Rowling?
Every time a large one came in, we'd go, oh, that was JK Rowling.
Really?
You know, I had this one day of despondency, and then the next day she tweeted about my case and kind of sent it around the world, and it all went haywire.
Wow. Is JK Rowling a transphobe? What happened to you?
So in 2018, I was working for a think tank in London, a non-partisan international development think tank. And I got interested in sex and gender, that dangerous subject. And I started paying attention to it for about a year before I tweeted or said anything. I sort of really wanted to understand, like, what the hell is this? Am I a bigot? You know, is this as obvious as I think it is? And then in late 2018, I started tweeting about it. I also, it was when the government was consulting on bringing in self-ID, so changing the Gender Recognition Act to make it easier for people to change their legal sex. And they were asking for people to respond to the consultation. So it was a public policy question. I worked at a think tank. It was a think tank where people could have all kinds of views and disagree on all sorts of things. And so I talked about it at work in relation to the government consultation. I shared a booklet about the consultation, and some people complained. A bit of the story. So I was based in London, but the headquarters of the organisation I worked for was in Washington, DC. It was people in Washington who complained, and then it escalated from there. I lost my job, and I took my employer to Employment Tribunal in 2019 on a belief discrimination case. And this was important because, so in UK law, the Equality Act, you're protected against discrimination on the basis of age, sex, race, disability, and so on, and what they call religion or belief. And so if you have a religion, that's a sort of brand name thing. It's obvious what a religion is, but a belief, a philosophical belief, basically it has to be like a religion. So it has to be something that is kind of serious, that affects your life, that affects how you live, that you're not going to give it up. And then it has this criteria that it has to be worthy of respect in a democratic society. So basically, if your belief is in Nazism or fascism, that's not protected against discrimination. But if your belief is in Scottish nationalism or ethical veganism, for example, it is. And so there was this question of, does the belief that men are men and women are women and that matters and it's important, is that protected as a philosophical belief?
I want to sort of leave that as a, let's see where that goes. It's one of those things that we read about in the news, what happened to you, and you go, oh, that's a person and that's a thing that happened. But we don't actually necessarily empathize with what was going on for you. When your contract wasn't renewed, you weren't able to work because of your belief. When did you first realize that was going to happen, and how did you feel in that moment?
So it was not long after I started tweeting about the topic. I got an email from HR in Washington, and I was I still thought it would be all right at that point, because the culture of the organisation was we argue about stuff, and it's quite a small organisation and people have different views. And so I wrote back to the, it really wasn't a big organisation. So, even the HR guy, I thought, oh, well, he'll be interested in the topic. And so I wrote back to him and I sent him a couple of things to read. And I said, you might not be aware this is an issue in the UK that the government's consulting on. I sent him something by Kathleen Stock. I still at that point thought, oh, well, this is normal. This is a normal issue that's controversial. We'll be able to talk about it. And then over the course of the next 6 months, my life kind of unraveled. But it took 6 months, of investigations. They got in consultants to look at my tweets. And all that time, most of the people within the organization I was talking to either agreed with me or agreed that it was a reasonable position to hold, that, there could be different views on this. And so it wasn't until March 2019 when I had a conversation with the big boss, and he basically said, it's too controversial, it's too difficult, we're letting you go.
Wow.
And I recorded that call, which you're not supposed to do, but I did, and obviously I used it in the tribunal, because at that point I felt like I'd lost all trust with the organisation, and so I have that recording, and I've only listened to it twice because my lawyers made me listen to it, and it's quite upsetting. I was saying in that call, all I'm saying is the definition of sex in the Equality Act, in law. It was this really Kafkaesque situation. I was saying the law in the UK protects people against discrimination on the basis of sex, male and female, and on the basis of gender reassignment, whether being transsexual or trans. So I was, giving the definition of the law, and this is what I was losing my job for. That was deeply, that was dark. And then, because as you say, it was my contract wasn't renewed. I wasn't given a P45 because I didn't have that sort of straightforward a job, and I had no idea that I had employment rights at that point. So, what do you do? I tweeted about it, and there were some feminist lawyers who had sort of dreamed up a case like mine before I even existed. They were waiting for a belief discrimination case.
Wow.
And so they kind of arrived like the fairy godmothers and said, we think you've got rights.
Wow. Did you ever imagine you might be at the centre of this kind of hoo-ha, particularly involving JK Rowling?
No, that came completely out of the blue. That was, that came after I lost in the first instance. So the first thing I had to do was put the claim in, and then the next thing I had to do was crowdfund for the money to pay for lawyers. And so most of that money came in £20, 20, 30, £50, thousands of them, while I was sort of sitting on my sofa in my pajamas. It was amazing. And then there were a few more larger ones, and every time a large one came in, we'd go, oh, that was JK Rowling.
Really?
Yeah, because, she'd already tweeted something about it and then deleted it and called it a senior moment, and so we had a kind of suspicion that she was sympathetic. So it was a joke, but it was like, oh, that one must be from JK Rowling.
How high were those?
Oh, just thousands. I mean, and I don't think they were, but that was kind of the joke.
It might have been her.
Yeah, it might have been her. But never reached out to her or anything. And didn't expect it at all. So when I lost, which was at the end of December in 2019, I had this one day of despondency, and then the next day she tweeted about my case and kind of sent it around the world, and it all went haywire.
Wow. Is it Rowling then? Not
Rowling. It is Rowling.
Bloody hell. Rowling, Bowie, all the real debates here. Were you a Harry Potter fan?
I'm not of the age to be a mad Harry Potter fan, but I read it to my kids, and I've seen all the movies, and so I'm a fan, a kind of ordinary fan, not a mad fan. Yeah,
I was a huge fan, I would love to have her on the show one day, but she doesn't really do interviews, unfortunately. Is JK Rowling a transphobe?
Depends how you define it. I don't think so, but I think trying to say, some people are transphobes and some aren't, on the spectrum of people who are gender critical, people who say that men are men and women are women. You can say it as politely as you like and as carefully as you like, and you'll still be called a transphobe. So, so I don't think it's helpful to try and say, well, JK Rowling is and I'm not. But, these people who are, less careful about what they say are. I mean, clearly, if somebody's attacking people in the street or, trying to have trans people lose their livelihood, that's transphobia. But saying in clear language, which is not what people want to hear, that someone is a man, that's what gets called transphobia.
Yeah.
And JK Rowling wrote this essay several months after she tweeted about my case, and she set out in such careful, just kind, thinking of everyone's rights, and she was still called a transphobe. So
that's right. I feel like we could still say, okay, well, this person's a transphobe because, as you say, they're trying to prevent somebody who represents as trans from doing their work, or they throw stuff at them in the street, or they just say, I hate those people because of who they are, or whatever. That to me seems like that's where a transphobe is. So the idea that you or JK Rowling might be just seems absurd.
Right. But I mean, I've read a definition of transphobia that says even having the conversation that says, well, this is transphobia and this isn't, that in itself is transphobia.
Bloody hell. Well, then everyone is. Because I get the impression, and we were speaking just before, that most people are on board with gender critical views. Is that right? Do we know that statistically?
So I've gone on and set up an organisation, Sex Matters, and we've done polling. And it's quite difficult when you do polling to ask people the question, because if you say a trans woman, quite a lot of people think that's a woman who identifies as a man. A trans woman is a man who identifies as a woman. And then quite a lot of people, even who understand that, think, oh, well, it's somebody who's had surgery, or somebody who perhaps really is a woman trapped in a man's body, or whatever that means. So in their mind, trans woman means basically a woman who had the unfortunate accident of being born male. I mean, that sounds crazy, but, Coronation Street had a trans woman character for a very long time. Hayley Cropper was played by a female actress. So people are thinking trans woman is Hayley Cropper. So when you ask the question in polling, you really have to ask it carefully to make sure that people understand what you're asking. But when you ask it carefully, saying a man who identifies as a woman who may or may not have had surgery, should they be allowed into women's changing rooms, showers, sports? Less than 30% say yes.
Right. Okay, interesting. It's almost like you have to educate people and prep them, and then it's sort of what was the point in the poll then? Because we've sort of leaned them so far in one way, we've primed them to say what we want them to say. So it just makes it a nonsense to even do the polling.
Well, I mean, to ask people a question, they have to understand the question.
Yeah.
But to explain the question, you have to say things that are defined as transphobic.
Oh.
And so if the person's been in any way kind of trained or primed to think that's transphobic, then, then they give the answer that they think is the respectable one. And so in the polling, what we find is the younger people are more likely to say yes, that a trans woman should be accepted into those situations. People with more education, more likely to say yes. Labour are more likely to say yes than Conservatives or Lib Dems.
Yeah, I gather that Keir Starmer, the leader of Britain's Labour Party, said something like 1 in 1,000 women have penises.
Yeah, and legally he's correct.
Wow.
So if you have a gender recognition certificate, so if you've gone through the process of applying to change the sex that's recorded by the registrar, legally, for some situations, that turns a man into a woman and a woman into a man, and no surgery is required. So there is a legal answer that says a very small proportion of women have penises.
I get the impression that Keir Starmer, because he's quite centrist, I think. I don't think he really believes that, does he?
No, I mean, I think he's giving a lawyer's answer there, and then he thinks that we can work around that. But the problem is, it's really difficult to work around because people get called transphobes for saying that actually women as a group exist. And what they thought when they brought this law in, well, they thought two things at the same time. They thought that there are a very small proportion of people who actually change sex for all purposes, and it would be completely unreasonable to treat them in any other way. They thought it's like if I said I was born a man, in what way would you want to treat me differently because I was born a man? But in practice, that's not what happens. What happens is people get a certificate. People can't actually change sex, however much they'd like to. Their sex still remains important, and so they have this certificate which says they're female when in fact they're male. And what they thought was, well, in those situations, the health service, the prisons, the schools, the sports will work around it, and will put in they put in exceptions in the law to allow them to work around it. But the problem is, if you're working in those sectors and you say, look, we need a policy that makes says there's a difference between males and females, you're called a transphobe. So you can't use the exceptions in the law.
What are some of the reasons that it would matter? Let's say if you had been born a man and now you're presenting as a woman, as far as I can see, you're a woman. What are some of the reasons that it is important that I know you are actually a man?
But that situation doesn't really exist. I mean,
Okay.
it's you were born a man and you decided to wear a dress and put makeup on, and now you say you're a woman. In what situations should I go along with that? And in what situations should I be forced to pretend that you really are a woman? In most situations in life, we don't differentiate legally between how you treat men and how you treat women. You pay them the same, you employ them to do the same jobs, you treat them equally, even though everyone, it is important who's a man and who's a woman and everyone can see. But where you have rules that treat men and women differently, they're around sport, fairness in sport, dignity and safety in any situation where people had taken their clothes off, basically, and data. So, in healthcare, for example, your doctor needs to know whether you're a man or a woman. And even though people know that when looking at you, the data has to be right too, because otherwise, you have algorithms, you have calculations, you have policies, you have risk assessments, which go on what's on paper. So it doesn't work to say, of course, everyone knows, but on paper, we're going to say that you're a woman, because sometimes you're making decisions on paper and those will be the wrong decisions if you're trying to interpret your heart monitor or something like that.
Yeah, a friend of mine was saying, because she read it was a famous feminist book in the last few years. I don't know who it was by or what it was called, but it was just all about how a lot of things in life seem to be made for men. Like sizes and different things like that. And I suppose if you skew an entire statistic, like an entire country's statistics by saying, well, no, there are a lot of women who are actually 6'4", and there are, and that's a very basic example, but then that will just continue to hurt women, I suppose. Fewer and fewer things will actually be built for women.
Yes, absolutely. And, the places where that really matters. One of them is around crime. 98% of sexual crimes are done by men, most of them against women and children, not all of them, but most of them. And so if you skew those statistics by saying, there are women with penises who are rapists, there are just very, very few women who undertake sexual crimes, and so you can skew those statistics really, really easily with just a few men.
And that is happening, I think, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, until very recently, they were putting men, including rapists, into women's prisons. They're now saying, so they've just changed the policy in England and Wales to say they won't put a man who's been convicted of a violent or sexual crime into a woman's prison without ministerial, it has to have ministerial agreement. So that's as far as they've gone. They'll still put a man who hasn't got a conviction for a sexual crime into a women's prison. And women in women's prisons are mainly there for non-violent offences. They tend to be vulnerable. They've already been victimised. They've often been victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, already. They're traumatized, vulnerable women, and then they're using them to socialize men who want to be women, and they can't get away.
Yeah, a lot of people get offended, I think, a lot of men in particular, with those statistics, and trans people do as well. And they say like, oh, so you're saying that we're all awful people who would commit these atrocities. But I guess something Helen Joyce was saying when she was on recently was just, well, we have laws for the extremes. That's why we have them. It's not because we don't have a law against murder because most humans are about to commit murder. It's a very, very small, tiny, minuscule number of people who commit murder, I imagine. But we have to have the law for them. So I don't want people, I guess, listening and viewing going like, well, hang on, you're saying we'd all do that, would we? I guess, I mean, most trans people would not probably take advantage of those things.
Right. We have this line, not all men. My husband's a lovely bloke, but he shouldn't be allowed into women's changing rooms. It's in
particular, no, I'm joking.
And I mean, it's interesting. One of the few places where you get to really have these arguments out is in court, because people can't run away, they can't get offended, they can't cry and leave. And so when my case came to Tribunal, I had the most fun of it was watching my lawyer cross-examine the other side, and the other side who had said that the leaflet that I'd brought in about the Gender Recognition Act consultation was transphobic. And so they went through it line by line to say, is this transphobic or not? And this leaflet said things like, we have women's prisons for the reason that men and women are different, and, not all men, and all of that. And the people who were being cross-examined were, economics PhDs, they, numerate people who shouldn't be jumping to, oh, are you saying that I'm a I'm a predator? And also, progressive, feminist guys who, ought to understand this stuff. And they were jumping to, but you're saying that all trans women are predators. It was, and you have the time and the space in court for the lawyers to kind of walk them through the arguments. And it was amazing to see it done, because there's almost nowhere else where that has happened. And part of the reason why there's such a disproportionate response to anyone who speaks up, I think, is to stop that happening. The reason that I spoke up about this is gender wasn't my specialist issue. I was working on tax, but I worked for a think tank, and I was thinking, where are the academics? Where are the think tanks? Where are the people having careful, compassionate, evidence-based discussions about a difficult topic? And the reason they don't is because the whole area has been landmined with offence. And so, one of the reasons why my case was so important was that it forced some of these people, and they were unlucky, my employers, that it was them who was forced to have this conversation, to go through these arguments and to justify why they thought it was unreasonable to say that men who identify as women are the same risk as men. We don't know if they're greater risk or not, but there's no reason to think they're less risk than other men. And therefore, the rules and the safeguards that you have to protect women, to protect fairness, shouldn't be disregarded because you have a class of men who say we're different. And plus, we've been down that road before. We used to think priests were different. We used to think scout leaders were different. We used to think, gymnastics coaches were different. We've learned through, hard learned lessons that you should never ring fence any group of people, but particularly any group of men, and say they're not a risk. Because even if that group in itself is not a risk, once you've put those rules around them, you then attract the people who want to find those loopholes.
I think it's a really interesting point that you just made about your employers. They were sort of unlucky to find themselves in that situation, because I can imagine, most people are not terrible people, and they're just sort of going about their lives. And I can imagine being that boss and going, or the person in the position to renew your contract, and going, oh God, what do we do? Like, she's probably right, but like, it's going to offend all these people, and we're going to get in trouble, and then other people are going to lose. What do we do? Because of the situation we've gotten ourselves into as a country, or as a civilization at the moment. So I feel a bit sorry. I mean, do you feel a bit sorry for them?
I do. And this all came out in the tribunal. So you get, one of the things you get is all the emails, all the meeting notes, all of the stuff that you didn't see at the time. So, as I said, I had this 6 months of feeling like my life was falling apart. And then once you bring the case, you get, just folders full of misfiled emails. And once you get them into a date order, you can see what was going on the other side while that was happening. And, it started out with the first meeting that they had after I'd tweeted and after HR had, before HR contacted me, they had a sort of regular management meeting and it was brought up. And they said, well, it looks like what she's saying is controversial. It's a difficult topic, but it doesn't look it doesn't look unreasonable. That's what they said at the outset. And so they said, ask her to put a disclaimer on her tweets, all views my own. And I was happy to do that. So that's where they were at the beginning. And so when they asked me to put a disclaimer on my tweets, I thought that's where we were. I thought we were at, okay, these are my personal views. They're reasonable. Not everyone agrees, but I work in a place that recognizes that not everyone agrees. And then over the course of 6 months, you can see through the emails how they went from that position, that was the culture of the organization. And that's important. Even if you don't care about this issue, you should care about think tanks, academia, journalists, politicians doing their job. And they were willing to kind of give all of that away because a few people complained, and because they became scared of the funders, the donors who give to the organisation. That was a big thing.
It's so sad how that's happening at the moment. Okay, we should get on to what happened in the court case then, because you lost.
Yes.
That's mad.
Yes.
And what did they say? That your view was not respectable?
Not worthy of respect in a democratic society. That's what the first employment tribunal said. And so that means that it was on par with Nazism or fascism.
This is Orwellian, or Kafkaesque, as you said. Or I don't know which one of the ones that we always say. Yes. Kafkaesque or Orwellian this time. But it's both of those things, I'm pretty sure.
Yes. And the weird thing was, I didn't have any trans colleagues. I was really talking about policy and kind of in general terms. But the thing that the whole tribunal got hung up on was whether I misgendered somebody. And misgendering, I mean, even that's not really defined, but at its core means calling someone he when they want to be called she or they or z or fey or something. But actually it expands to all words about sex, because it doesn't really make sense to say someone is she but they're a man or they're male. And so you give away the pronoun, you're also giving away man, male, mother, father, son, daughter, all of those go with it. But at the core, it was pronouns. And I didn't have any trans colleagues. And when they first emailed me, I was kind of early in my journey. So I emailed back and said, of course, I'd be willing to respect anyone's, I'm not sure, I don't think I said pronouns, but anyone's identity in the workplace. And I would. But where it comes to a situation where you have to be clear about what sex somebody is, either because you're talking about rules and policy or because it's a practical situation, like who's allowed in which toilets, you have to be able to say that person's a man. And so that was the position, but I hadn't misgendered anyone. And the tribunal, so when they looked at all of the disclosures, there was this weird, there was something else going on at the same time, which was, so when I first decided I wanted to talk about this issue, I pushed at all the doors that were in front of me in my life. So one of them was I tweeted about it. One of them was I wrote about it in relation to international development, the sector I was working in. And one of them was I wrote to the Scouts, because I was a Scout leader, Cub Scout leader. And the Cub Scouts had a terrible policy, as all organizations do at this point, of saying if a child says they're the opposite sex, you treat them as the opposite sex, and you might not tell their parents that you're doing that. Yeah. And so I had been in a back and forth correspondence with Scouts about this, and I had tweeted, I posted about it on a big Scouts Facebook group, and a bunch of Scout leaders from around the country had jumped on me, this kind of rainbow caucus of Scout leaders saying that I was transphobic for saying you should be concerned about child safeguarding. And this discussion spilled out onto Twitter with a Scout leader in Dundee. I mean, as I say, this is a bit of a side story, but it does come back. A Scout leader in Dundee who is non-binary, who looks like you, literally, but wants to be called they, them. And I had misgendered this person by saying, I'd said, he said this.
Oh, you know what? I'm not, because the she, he thing, okay, you know, but if you misgender someone who represents as they, them, I'm not having it. I'm not even entering that discussion, because if someone's okay, okay, let's do that. The they, them, and it's just a bloke. Like, and I've said this before, like the non-binary thing, this idea of I'm not one of them, like the arrogance, the entitlement, like I'm not even a gender or sex because I've got and it makes it look like the rest of us are just really boring. Like right. I'm a man, so I only have man traits, and you're a woman who only has woman traits. Like, fuck that. Sorry, it annoys me.
Yes,
continue.
No, absolutely. And so the only example of misgendering they could find in the whole, all of my disclosures was that I had called this man he on Twitter, who I've never met, with nothing to do with my workplace. And then he had complained to Scouts about it and said I'd misgendered. And Scouts ended up investigating me for 2 years over this. And in the end, they apologized to me for it. But I left Scouts because, you know, they'd made it miserable for me. Yeah. And so, there was this misgendering of a man by calling him he, went into the bundle, and the judge got really hung up on that. The idea that you should never call someone by the wrong pronouns. And the reason we think the judge got so hung up on that is probably because he was trained, because the judges have been trained by an organisation called Gendered Intelligence, which tells them this. And they also have this thing called the Equal Treatment Bench Book, which is guidance for judges on inclusion. And some of the stuff, it's like, you know, it started off very small and it's become quite thick over the years. And some of it is really useful stuff about what to do if you've got a deaf claimant, or a claimant who doesn't speak English, or a woman who is wearing a burqa, or, you know, all of the different kinds of people that you might meet in a courtroom. How do you make sure that justice is done fairly by them? And it has a whole chapter on trans, which at the time said, don't misgender. And so I think the judge, he wasn't looking at the law, he was looking at his training, he was looking at the Equal Treatment Bench Book, and he thought I was a bigot for not being kind, not being willing to say that a man is a woman, or they. And I think, you know, I think they does show you how ridiculous it is. But, you know, if I had to call you they, or if I had to call you she, you're still a man. There's nothing you can do to turn yourself into a woman. Yeah,
but did you see what I mean? That they is even more preposterous, and not because a lot of people use the argument, because of the language. And I don't agree with that. Like, because I don't think it is that hard, the language. But I think we do use they for someone we don't know their sex or gender all the time. They're a good person. We don't, you know. I don't think that's a problem at all. The problem is it's ridiculous that somebody thinks that they're above having a gender or sex. Like, who the hell do you think you are?
I mean, I think even the whole thing of like putting in your email signature or your bio that you're a he, him. I mean, I can tell you're a he, him. And I can tell, you know, when I'm walking down the street late at night and there's a man walking behind me, I can tell he's a he, him. I don't have to ask his pronouns. The idea that people can't tell is itself insidious, even if you're just telling me you're a he, him. I know you're a he, him.
Or it's pledging allegiance to an ideology.
It's that as well.
It's 2 + 2 = 5, right? So it's Orwell's, you know, and I went back to look at that bit from 1984, and they have to tell the main character over and over, no, 2 + 2 = 5, until he eventually believes it, and that means you're a card-carrying member of the ideological party. That's why I focus so much on the trans issues, because some people are wondering, you know, why is this something that you're and there's quite a few different topics I like to cover, but this to me is the absolute, like, archetypal example, the prime example of just like 2 + 2 = 5, of can we get you, the population, to say something that everyone knows is clearly false And if we can get you to say that, then we can get you to do anything. I think it leads to, the presidents of Harvard the other day and MIT and just saying that it's okay to call for the genocide of Jews. I honestly think they're linked, because I think once you're in that party, you can think those who do you know this thing?
Yes, can make you commit atrocities.
Yeah, what was the first bit? Make you believe. Those who make you bloody believe. Oh, I've got to find this. Those who can make you absurdities.
Yes, that's it.
Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And I think that's the first step, is if you can do the 2 + 2 = 5 of trans women are women, the UN trans lesbians are lesbians.
Yeah, and what that then does to institutions, it means that you get rid of, whether like me, you fire them or you just make their life hell, or they just leave, people who will speak up about difficult things, and you keep the people who are yes men, and that doesn't make good, healthy organizations that seek after truth on all kinds of things. But sex, like you say, it's such a universal thing. It's it's hardwired. It's predates human beings. It predates mammals. It's it's so important to the fabric of life, that if you can make people lie about that, you can make them lie about anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it is an ideological sort of at the bottom of the emails. How did you feel then? I mean, were you shocked that you lost that?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. There was a point in the tribunal where I think my lawyers knew I lost. They can read the read to the judge. That there was a point at which the judge started cross-examining me. The judge started asking me questions, which is not a good thing. And the judge was asking me about, well, it was interesting, asking me about a school. So asking me about, well, what about a trans teacher? Because I had said I would call someone by their preferred pronouns, but I would want to be clear what sex they were in a situation where sex matters. And I didn't work in a school, but that was the road that the judge went down. And he started asking me, well, what about a trans teacher? And so I said, well, if a teacher transitions, that doesn't mean you should lie to the children about what sex they are. I said you should find a form of words that is respectful to that teacher, but says to the pupils, Mr. So-and-so now wants to be called Miss So-and-so. He's still a man. Don't, be respectful. I mean, it's not for me to work out what those words are, and those words have to be age appropriate to the age of the child. And it was that was the road that he went down, and it was at that point you could kind of see in his eyes that he decided I was a bigot, because what I was saying was children's rights, protecting children, respecting the ability to talk about the truth where you're safeguarding children matters more than protecting the feelings of a teacher who wants to transition. And that did not compute for him. And you could sort of see the change then. So, but, I mean, I didn't walk out of the court thinking I'd lost, because you don't. So it really, the day the judgment came, I was just gutted, and I'd raised hundreds of thousands of pounds to pay for it. People had backed me, and because it was a test case, it meant that it was open season for other people who had the same belief as me. That it was saying you can fire these people, you can discriminate against them, you can harass them with impunity.
It's absolutely mad, and you must have been gutted then. And did you want to just go on Twitter and just be like, come, and get everyone riled up?
It's the one day I can't remember very well.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's an emotional day.
Yeah.
This was Judge James Taylor.
Yes.
Well, it's just, I want to say he's a bigot, but I don't think he's a bigot any more than you are. But if he's going to sort of suggest that you are, then okay, well, why isn't your view bigoted?
I mean, his view was wrong. His view was wrong in law, and it was turned over. I met him. I've seen him twice. I saw him in the street outside of one of the courts in central London, and we both went like that. And then I saw him at a lawyer's party, and I shook his hand, and I said we were thinking about who to cast to play him in the film, which isn't being made yet, but in my mind.
Oh my God. How difficult? How long does it take to get
the appeal? It was another. I'm going to get this wrong, but it was like 18 months. So then you have to put in the appeal. They have to agree that you have grounds for appeal, and then you wait for a date. It was just appealing that question about whether the belief is protected in law. So I won that in 2021, June 2021, and then I had to go back to Employment Tribunal again for my case, so that I personally was discriminated against by my employers. Right. So at that point they said, okay, we recognise that the belief is protected, but what you said was so unreasonable and egregious and harmful that it was still legitimate for us to treat you in the way we did, because that a belief is protected doesn't mean you can say whatever you like. If you're a Christian, your belief is protected, but you're not allowed to go into the workplace and tell your colleagues that they're going to hell.
Sure.
But you are allowed to say that you're a Christian. You're allowed to state your beliefs where it would be reasonable to. And there have been lots of cases about this, about wearing crosses and so on. So my employer was saying, even though you have this belief that's protected, we think you were so egregious that we were right to do what we did. So then we went back. We had to go through all of that. I won that. And then fourth time, had to go back to say whether they would give me any money.
You were awarded $91,500 for loss of earnings and $14,900 in interest?
Yes.
Do you have to pay tax on that?
Hopefully not. I've got to do my tax return. Legally, hopefully not. I've got to get my tax return in this week.
Okay, you should probably speak to an accountant and find out.
No, it's in the judgment. There's a whole question about what is and what isn't taxable, and they don't think this is taxable.
Okay, interesting. Do you know who ContraPoints is?
Yes.
YouTuber, for anyone who doesn't know, and probably maybe the most famous YouTuber who is a trans person, I guess a man who identifies as a woman. And he or she did a whole thing on you and JK Rowling, and collected tweets of yours that were transphobic. And she's like reading this out, and I'm saying she just for... I don't even know.
You can say what you like.
I don't even know. But she said, yes, I think that it was your tweet. Yes, I think that male people are not women. I don't think being a woman/female is a matter of identity or womanly feelings. It is biology. People of either sex should not be constrained or discriminated against if they don't conform to traditional gender experience. And they even got an English narrator to read it out, which I thought was quite a nice touch. Did you hear that? They had like an English voice.
Yes.
But I just that's transphobic now.
Yeah.
And this is someone with 6 million subscribers.
Yeah.
Or 2 million.
And the tweets, so those tweets, what happened was I tweeted a question. So right at the beginning when I started tweeting, I just tweeted kind of news stories and, things that were going on, and nobody responded to me. And I had about 2,000 followers at that point, and they were all, policy wonks. They like an argument. And nobody was responding to me either to say, you're a bigot, you're terrible, or I agree with you. It was it was strange. And so then there was this one day when a guy called Philip Bunce, who works at Credit Suisse, was put on a list of 100 women in business, women leaders in business. Philip, okay. Who sometimes, like several days a week, comes to work in a dress and a wig and makeup and calls himself Pips. And so he's she on those days and he on the days when he's Philip, and was put on this list of women in business. And so I thought that was obscene.
Yes.
And I asked a question, do you think this person should have been recognised as a woman for this purpose? And that question got people talking to me. So there was sort of about a week of several hundred tweets, when you get into like multi-threaded conversations with lots and lots of people, of serious people that I worked with, or people that were in that kind of world, some of them agreeing, some of them not agreeing, some of them, I was quite surprised at like hard-nosed economists saying, well, if she thinks that some part of her is female, then we should respect that. This is a cross-dresser. This is a transvestite. We know that this is a lifestyle and everyone has human rights. But, 5 minutes ago, we knew what this was. And now we're saying a transvestite is a woman on the days when he wears a wig, which is sexist, if nothing else.
Taking the place of a woman.
Yeah. And just saying that, being a woman is about makeup and hair. It's just sexist, regressive nonsense. Anyway, but I think my actual crime was I started a conversation and there were people making points in either direction and agreeing and disagreeing, which is all that I wanted. And so those were the tweets that's what ContraPoints was reading. And those were the tweets that were investigated by my employer and then kind of picked over one by one in the court. So it wasn't a sort of manifesto. It was responses to other people saying, well, what about this and what about that?
I think that's even better because these are just responses rather than necessarily a thought out manifesto. And they're still very reasonable.
Yeah.
And the point you make as well, I'm glad you addressed that about how offensive it is to women, this idea that putting makeup on and long hair, that now means I'm a woman. Because there will be a number of comments below this video where people say, oh, come on, they clearly are a woman now. And I sometimes, I don't really reply often anymore, but I go, why? What is it? And I said, please don't say makeup and long hair that makes a man a woman, because that's so offensive. My future daughter, doesn't have to have long hair or nails. And if the suggestion that if she doesn't do that, she's any less feminine or less womanly, I can't think of a more insulting, bigoted view than that. So then they go, no, there are just other things. And you go, what? And no one's ever answered. Someone tried to say the way that women walk and present their buttocks. Like that was a genuine, progressive person trying to say that. But
also, that's quite hard to change. The thing that you can change by taking medication, hormones, is men can grow boobs, and I think that that is basically what people are thinking when they if a man has gone to the effort of growing tits, then he's a woman.
Growing tits and taking off their willy.
Well, most don't take off their willy. So this week, Munro Bergdorf, a model, trans woman model, was appointed by UN Women UK as their champion for women, and that we complained. And people said, but Munro is a woman. Munro has better makeup than me and great boobs, but also, well, at least as far as I know, until a couple of years ago, and I think it's probably still true, also has penis and balls. He posed for a arty naked shot showing this, and most men are attached to their genitals, understandably. Sure. So for most people it isn't. It's facial surgery, it's makeup, it's getting boobs. A lot of people think, well, if someone was to have the surgery, then that makes them a woman. One, I don't think it does, but two, you can't have any rights that depend on saying that someone must have their genitals operated on, because that's sterilization. It's forced sterilization. They used to give gender recognition certificates out in the Netherlands and Sweden, I think, on that basis, and they had to give compensation to people because because it's a human rights abuse to say we're going to give you these rights if you have your balls chopped off. You can't do that.
Wow, that's a really interesting thought. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. That's really interesting. Well, ContraPoints continued and read out that JK Rowling very famous tweet, dress however you please. And this is, I think it's important because I think a lot of people watching, although people in maybe our ideological group or whatever it might be in our camp know this tweet very well now. A lot of people don't. They just assume JK Rowling must be a bigger, I don't know what it is she said. This is what she said. Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who will have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real. I stand with Maya. Which must have been nice for you.
Yeah.
But like, where is the bigotry there?
Yeah. And I mean, she's a good writer. She's a really, really good writer. I write these long articles about policy and law, and often I look at them and go, yeah, just JK Rowling's tweet. She had it all. She had it all in that one tweet.
Yeah, she's good.
Everyone has human rights. Dress how you please. You have freedom of expression. Sleep with whoever will have you. Other people's consent matters, but there are all kinds of different sexual orientations and expressions of that. And don't try and drive people out of their jobs. I mean, she really got it all into one tweet.
She's someone who got it from both sides now, because when Harry Potter was first released, she got it from the religious right, I suppose, and now what I would call the religious left.
Yeah, I mean, I think quite often people who've been cancelled for one thing are braver. They know what to expect, and so before I tweeted about this and got cancelled about this, I was quite fighty about tax, which was the topic I worked on, and I sort of got my job by pointing out some bullshit that the organisation that I ended up being employed by had published and picking it apart, and so it was a much smaller but actually equally toxic pool that I was commenting in. And quite often you find people who, religious people, they have a hill that they're willing to die on, and they've experienced that before. But people who've defended an unpopular position in some other sphere seem to be more willing to speak up about this one.
It does seem to be the case. What do you think? I mean, we sort of talked about this bit at the beginning, but what is ContraPoints finding transphobic in JK Rowling's tweets and your tweets?
Ultimately, it's about women saying no. That's what transphobic means, and it, as politely as you can say it, you're still saying no. And so transphobia is used as a weapon against women being able to say no, and against institutions being able to say we have clear rules, and no means no. It's as simple as that.
Are there any facts or arguments that can convince you that men, for all intents and purposes, can be women? Intersex, clownfish, those are the ones that are brought up usually.
Humans are not clownfish, as Helen said. Sex, everyone has a mother and a father, whether those are the people that brought you up or not. Everyone biologically has a mother or a father. Everyone's mother is female. Mm-hmm. Everyone's father is male. And that goes back, to the whole history of humankind. You can't get away from that. And then being a mother or not being a mother, being vulnerable to getting pregnant, shapes women's lives. It's not something you can put in a box and say, oh, this is a 9-month thing. This is a lifetime thing. It's a lifetime of a child's thing. And it's what shapes evolution. And evolution, that's how I understand the world. So there's no getting away from that. Yeah.
Where can people, I've got another question for you afterwards, but where can people follow you and support you?
So my organisation is Sex Matters, sex-matters.org. It's on Twitter. It's on the internet and website. That's the word I was looking for. Instagram, all of those kind of places. I'm on Twitter as M Forstater. They can follow me. They can support Sex Matters. We send out a memo every Friday with all the news on sex and gender from the UK, mainly from the UK. And when we started this, we thought, is there going to be enough to say every week? And there's never not been something going on. It's been quite amazing, and the tide is turning in terms of now we can speak about it. Since my case, people are speaking about it, and they're starting to look at the conflicts of rights and try to work those out.
Who is a heretic you admire? Not Helen Joyce.
Am I not allowed to say Helen?
No, of course you can. Of course, because she said you, of course,
yes.
And that was very embarrassing for you. And no, you can say whatever you want.
Well, I'm going to say two people. I'm going to say Helen, partly because she said me, but also because it's just brilliant having a partner in crime on this, and I couldn't hope for a better one. She's just so articulate and clear about these issues. And then the other person I want to say is Julie Bindel, who's just been doing this longer than almost anyone else, long before I had woken up to this issue. She's been cancelled by every side, and she's still speaking up.
Amazing. Go and follow Maya. We'll put all her links in the description down below. Like this video, share it around, and keep watching. I'll put something right here. We're going to go and answer a couple of questions from you guys on Locals now, andrewgold.locals.com. But as I say, keep on watching.